I don't like starting these late here. The committee will now come to order. We're coming together at a very important time for the Postal Service, where postal workers just successfully delivered ballot mail during a busy election season and are now ramping up for a peak holiday season. And Postmaster General shared some numbers for the election mail. I think you'll probably talk about in your testimony here today, but certainly a very busy time. And I certainly appreciate Postmaster General DeJoy for being before us here today to answer questions about the Postal Service operations, finances, and its services to the American people every day. One key issue we'll discuss today is the Postal Service's proposed service changes, which are currently under review by the Postal Regulatory Commission. We will continue to examine these plans and their potential impacts on constituents, as well as their implications for Postal Service finances. The Postal Service connects Americans everywhere, delivering critical mail like prescription drugs, Social Security checks, rent payments, small business packages, and the list goes on. Americans rely on the Postal Service every day, so it's critical that we understand its plans for service, operations, and finances. Our last hearing with the Postmaster General was in April, where we discussed the significant nationwide changes the Postal Service has begun making to its operational network. These include plans to consolidate facilities and reduce truck trips and other changes as to how mail is delivered. These changes will have raised concerns about service quality and cost effectiveness, particularly in rural areas like Iron Mountain Processing Center in my home state of Michigan. At our last hearing and afterward, my colleagues and I urged you to, Postmaster General, to pause and further study these changes before moving forward to fully understand their impacts on the service and cost. As a result, the Postal Service paused a number of facility consolidations until January of 2025. The Postal Service also requested an advisory opinion from its regulator, the Postal Regulatory Commission, to further study these changes. I think this is a positive step to fully understand the impacts through a transparent public process. However, since our last hearing, the Postal Service has also announced new changes, including changes to its service standards, which dictate the speed of mail delivery. Members of Congress, including members of this committee, have continued to raise questions about these changes and about the service impacts. 2 years ago, I led the passage of the Bipartisan Postal Service Reform Act, the first major reforms to the Postal Service in over 15 years. This legislation set the agency on a more stable financial footing, providing over $50 billion in financial relief over 10 years. The Postal Service is not on the brink of financial crisis, but it does need to make careful decisions about how it moves forward. And while the Postal Service is making changes intended to save cost, questions certainly remain about tracking actual cost reductions and the potential for service cuts that also impact the bottom line. Above all, the Postal Service must continue to focus on its public service mandate to deliver to each and every American. And that's why we're here today, to ensure the Postal Service remains accountable to Congress and the American people. The members of this committee and other senators I've heard from are certainly looking for a very open discussion. Mr. DeJoy, thank you. Thank you for being here today, for answering members' questions, and I look forward to a robust discussion. I would now like to turn over the mic to Ranking Member Paul for his opening remarks.
Over 40 years ago, Milton Friedman remarked, if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand. While Friedman was discussing price controls and output restrictions in oil and gas in Dubai, this same logic can be applied to the U.S. Postal Service. In 2020, Congress was promised that a $107 billion bailout would put the post office out of the roll and out of the hole it has been within 3 or 4 years. We were also told that the USPS operations would break even by 2031. Postmaster DeJoy sat in front of our committee in August of that year and stated, I am absolutely convinced that with some help from Congress and our regulator, we can do it, and that there is a bright future ahead for the post office. I argued against giving more taxpayer money to the Postal Service suggesting that private business would be better at managing ongoing costs by making the necessary cuts. Unfortunately, my concerns have proven to be correct. The Postal Service's Delivering for America initiative, the bailout, was expected to yield quick results. However, the Post Office lost $6.5 billion in 2023 and is set to lose $9.5 billion in 2024. That doesn't sound like progress. They were losing $1 billion a quarter. Now they're losing $2 billion a quarter. Only in Washington can someone point to losing $2 billion a quarter as a success. Given the continued financial shortfalls, it is entirely nonsensical for the USPS to convert more than 190,000 service workers into career roles since October 2020. If this were a private business, you'd be doing the opposite. If you were a unionized corporation in one state, what do? They actually move to another state and open a non-unionized in a right-to-work state, and that's how they continue to exist. Corporations don't add to their misery by adding and increasing their labor costs. These career roles, government career roles, effectively allow those workers to make 50% more per hour and create decades of benefits responsibilities that will make breaking even in the future even more difficult. When we had pension problems in Kentucky, we did the opposite. We ended up changing from a pension. We went to a contribution plan, and then we gradually are fixing it. It's still taking a long time because we had the old obligations, but we gradually figured out how to go to a new plan where we wouldn't be stuck with all these pensions. These positions are of insourcing jobs that were provided at lower cost before by private partners, so we're increasing the cost of the post office. During the Postal Service Reform Act, I argued that no funding should be given to USPS without changes to its labor practices and cost. Instead, no labor changes were made, and now Americans are left holding the bag of an ever more bloated Postal Service. The Postal Service has tried to explain away these bad numbers due to the costs that USPS cannot control. But the service is spending $9.6 billion on electric delivery vehicles and spending nearly $40 billion over 10 years to convert and build certain facilities into hubs that so far have resulted in worse delivery and services. In order to keep making these infrastructure updates, the Postal Service is asked to raise its $15 billion borrowing limit with the Treasury Department. Hardly sounds like a success. Private sector companies deal with uncontrolled costs all the time, including the same factors USPS faces like inflation, and they find a way to provide for their owners and shareholders. But they don't do it by adding more union employment. USPS would count for the uncontrollable costs in their budget and stop coming to Congress. You know, you guys should try to fix the problems that keep coming back and asking for more. This hasn't stopped Congress, though, from throwing even more money at the Postal Service. For those counting, that's $120 billion in funding and relief in the past 4 years alone. While $120 billion is already an astounding number on its own, when you consider the sum relative to our nation's dismal fiscal condition, it suddenly becomes reckless. We're over $36 trillion in debt. It's time to do something different. What we're not seeing is anything different at the post office, and I, for one, say it's about time we have some reform.
Thank you, Ranking Member Paul. It is the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses, so Mr. DeJoy, if you'd please stand and raise your right hand. You swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You may be seated, and you're recognized for your opening remarks.
Good morning, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Paul, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to once again discuss the significant progress that the U.S. Postal Service is making in accomplishing the objectives identified in the Delivering for America plan. When I agreed to take the role as Postmaster General, the nation was at the beginning of a pandemic, and the Postal Service was an organization in crisis, facing a diverse array of challenges that put the organization on a near-term trajectory to financial and service collapse. The Postal Service had lost almost $90 billion, was projected to lose another $200 billion over the next 10 years, and was about to run out of cash before year end. Our over 31,000 facilities were in shocking, horrible condition, with over $20 billion in deferred maintenance and ill-equipped for modern-day tasks. We had not met our service standards in almost 10 years, and had not reduced work hours in over 8 years, despite significantly reduced volume. We had billions of dollars of self-inflicted wounds from poorly evolved packaged products and had an organization and operational strategy that had long ago become dysfunctional. More explicitly, over 57% of our 31,000 post offices did not cover the cost of the people that worked at them, and 76% of our 235,817 delivery routes lost money. We ran 55,000 trucks a day, 70% empty, and had 4 different networks operating at significantly low utilization, wasting billions of dollars. This all came to a head in the peak season of 2021 when we were overwhelmed and dramatically impacted service throughout the nation for many months. This was the dreadful condition and trajectory of the Postal Service prior to the DFA, and there was no plan anywhere to do anything about it. The DFA plan has 5 simple directional objectives to be accomplished in consideration with the laws and regulations that govern the Postal Service today, and the relevant attributes of our evolving economy, environment, geography, marketplace, and competitive landscape. These objectives are to improve our operational precision and organizational effectiveness, to reduce our cost of performance, to create reliable and affordable service, to grow our revenue and margin on our products, to create productive and long-term careers for our employees. These initiatives and the commitment to this transformation has been embraced by our whole organization, and the pace of change and accomplishments are impressive. We are a different organization today, and I'm impressed by the talent and tenacity of our people as they work hard to make the Postal Service the best in commerce and public service for many years to come, a unique opportunity we have, and as the Congress intended when they created us. However, times have changed, and so has what it takes to be that entity that Congress intended. And while we have accomplished a great deal, we are at the beginning of an ongoing journey to evolve with the nation rather than lag behind. In the past, the inability and unwillingness to make the necessary changes when required is what had caused the condition and trajectory of the organization when I arrived here. To understand the full picture that the advisory opinion contemplates and solves, I refer you to my written testimony. However, in summary, we have prepared a comprehensive proposal that has been responsive to hundreds of questions asked of us by the PRC and other parties. Let me share some key points as a foundation to help set aside the fears and misunderstandings that seem to surround the PRC advisory opinion. The changes we propose are to the collection, not the delivery of mail. In fact, we expect delivery times for most mail to improve. Your constituents receive far more delivered mail than they send, and to further isolate the impact of our proposed change, it is primarily single-piece, first-class mail to which we propose to modify the collection schedule and only by a matter of hours. In the last 25 years, the volume of first-class single-piece mail has plummeted from 57 billion pieces to 12 billion. Yet the chaotic, costly, and illogical network we have been laboring under was originally designed for mail, but now must be redesigned to include the increased package volume and redesigned to include the increased package volume over an integrated network. The survival of mail and the Postal Service itself depends on successfully navigating this irreversible volume shift. Although the proposal analyzes volume and distance to propose schedule changes in the collection of single-piece mail, it is not a proposal that primarily impacts rural communities. The savings and operational efficiencies achieved here are substantial, and I assure you are necessary to preserve the universal service obligation. The very mandate that policymakers fear is being called into question is what we are in fact saving. Please note that any service adjustments fall within the existing 2- and 5-day service standards, and that the proposal introduces standards that are relatable to our customers and that they will be based on the 5-digit zip codes we are familiar with. The changes proposed create from a network of massive chaos and redundancy an integrated mail and package network as required by the recent postal reform legislation, thereby correcting for poor operating practices and enabling us to compete for new revenues and survive. In addition, the letter of invitation I received for this hearing requested that we also discuss transparency and accountability responsibilities we shoulder. In my written testimony, I've detailed for you heavy transparency, regulatory, and accountability burden under which we labor. It is detailed in testimony and the weighty attachment that reminds the reader that we are not a typical government agency. We are a self-financed and independent establishment of the executive branch. We must operate in many ways like a private business, as we have, and we have many competitors. We also have many layers of regulation and oversight that would cripple a private company that also had our scope and our public policy mandates. This has significance as it has paralyzed the Postal Service of the past and a contributing reason why we are in the predicament we are in. Relatedly, I share testimony and attachment that details our unfunded mandates as essential and justified as our universal service obligation is. It comes at a very high cost that needs to be reckoned with at the same time as mail and package volume shift, delivery points steadily increase, costs climb, and pressures not to change a single thing about our service persist. I welcome the opportunity to educate the committee on our plans to move the organization forward. I welcome you on that journey. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Postmaster General, in September, I asked for your commitment to report to this committee on how the Postal Service has substantially and substantively considered the Postal Regulatory Commission's input on national changes that are going to be made to the network and to service standards. You committed at that time to provide comprehensive responses to any PRC recommendations. But I'd just like to follow up on that, if I may, sir. Will you provide this committee with a copy of your comprehensive response to each of the PRC's recommendations when they come out? Yes or no?
I don't see why, unless there's some regulatory reason or not to. We will submit our responses to the Postal Regulatory Commission, and I think I'm happy to send you a copy of our responses.
So you'll provide that to us?
Yeah.
Appreciate it. For each PRC recommendation, you will provide a detailed explanation as to whether USPS will implement the recommendations as well?
We will answer the responses comprehensively. So, to the extent...
Including, we asked to the degree you will implement or not.
I'm sorry?
Including the degree to which you're going to implement or not implement going forward. So there's a specific way that we go about answering questions and that our legal department deals with, but from the standpoint of the organization as a whole, whether we submit it in that or we announce publicly what we're going to do at the same time, there will be full disclosure and transparency as to what we're going to do, what we're actually going to do. Okay, very good. The Postal Service is required to provide, quote, prompt, reliable, and efficient service to all communities, as you're well aware. That includes rural areas. Rural Americans, like my constituents in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, rely on the Postal Service to promptly deliver Social Security checks, rent payments, all sorts of critical mail. And the Postal Service has announced service standard changes that would significantly impact rural mail. Based on the numbers the Postal Service has filed with the PRC, your plan is to slow down 68% of single-piece first-class mail in rural areas, and that compares to 34% in urban areas. You would slow down roughly 15% of rural mail and upgrade only about 3% of it. These are necessary deliveries for these communities. It would come late. So my question for you, sir, is how does this slowdown of rural mail, if implemented, comply with the Postal Service's obligation to provide service and prompt service to all communities?
So I'm not familiar with those numbers that you cite. First off, delivery of mail to rural areas and to all areas will not change, and in many cases, in a few cases, about 10 or 15% will in fact improve. Delivery is not being affected. Okay, we are talking about the collection process of single-piece first-class mail only, right? Single-piece first-class mail was 59 billion pieces 20 years ago, 23 years ago. It's down to 12 billion pieces now. And we run the same collection processes for single-piece first-class mail that drive significant cost and take up a significant amount of time in moving the overwhelming amount of volume that moves through the system. So I'm not anticipating on the delivery side, I'm not anticipating any slow. I'm anticipating improvement in the delivery times, because most mail originates within the 50-mile radius of the operations we're talking about, and it's the collection of single-piece mail going out of these areas that could be slowed down somewhere between 12 and 24 hours.
Plans to reduce truck trips in areas across the country, collecting mail less often from outlying facilities and therefore reducing services. You tested this initiative in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and my constituents have now reported delays to important mail, like insurance claims, rent checks, the list goes on. There have also been delayed prescriptions where extra days certainly matter. And is that permanent up in the UP?
We're planning, so that was an initiative called Local Transportation Optimization. We rolled that out in 12 locations around the nation. Whether service, the incidents that you are speaking about consequences were related to that change or not, I cannot comment on, because there are other reasons why service fails or why expectations are not met. In terms of the changing environment, there are a lot of places where we exceed in service, and part of the rationalization of the network is to meet the standard. But LTO, we went back and looked at it, and it was not consequential enough and executable enough to get the amount of cost savings that we needed, and we've changed to the more regional approach that we're taking, going forward. And that's in our filing. So the concept is the same. The area is just bigger that we're going to deal with.
When the Postal Service released its strategic plan in 2021, it called for postal reform, which was completed. It also called for executive actions to change how the Office of Personnel Management calculates Postal Service pension obligations. I sent a letter to the White House pushing for this change, and OPM simply uses outdated accounting rules for postal employees, as you know, compared to other employees. And that puts extra cost onto the Postal Service. This could be changed and I believe could save billions of dollars while also saving pensions. So my question for you, sir, is are you still in favor of making this administrative change? And could you explain to this committee why that would be important?
So there's two areas of our pension that we are interested. One is the CSRS reallocation, when we were separated as an independent agency, from the federal government. We have calculated a significant shifting of the federal government's burden for its retirees at the time onto our balance sheet, and we have, and this is one of the things you helped us with, trying to, writing to get actually executive action to make that change, which the Office of Legal Counsel has said that requires legislative change instead of executive change. So, but yes, we do feel the calculations show that we were overburdened when we separated from the from the government. There are other things within our retirement plan. I expect to have 610,000 people next year in our organization, and I'll have 710,000 people on my retirement plan. There are things within our investment structure that are killers, to us. This is public. This is private. This is enterprise services money that we have aggregated and put into the foundation. We have to invest it as with the federal government, and we don't get the returns like a TVA or an Amtrak. That's one of the other things that we're looking to do. And then there's some other subtle magic that OPM does with their calculations that are punitive to us relative to the age group, the age calculations that they use for, for us, and so forth. It is a huge issue. It was 80% of our loss this year. In my projections to break even over the last 3 years, we had an additional $10 billion of bills from the federal government on our on our retirement plan that we were not expecting, and were well above the projections in the thing. It's no different than any major corporation that found themselves in these particular constraints when they had defined benefit plans. However, in some cases, they were able to raise their prices and so on and so forth, or do their investments so it concurs with the changing marketplace. We had nothing available to us. We could not raise our prices effectively for the changes in the economy, and we could not rationally put investments with regard to meet that obligation. So it is an obligation that will continue to be detrimental to the survival of the organization.
Thank you. Ranking Member Paul, recognized for your questions.
You mentioned in your testimony that the post office is different than other areas of government, that it has to